Joe Burrow is done with his summer vacation and is ready to give people something to talk about. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day. And in fact, we're back to our full-time schedule next week, getting ready for training camp. And as the summer winds down and Joe Burrow finishes up his summer vacation, well, we're going to do the same here after this week. And if you're new to the show, you're ready to get ready for the season, ready for training camp previews, a little offseason recap. If you haven't been paying attention and you're just coming back to the Bengals, we're going to cover that in the next couple of weeks here on Locked On Bengals. So you can find us on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. And shout out to all the everydayers out there and all of you who make us a first listen habit. We appreciate all of you who make us part of your daily routine. And James, Joe Burrow spent some time with the Pardon My Take podcast, and we learned why he won't come on this podcast. Not that we've ever directly asked him to, I guess, but he said that he's done one non-Pardon My Take podcast in his life. He's done 4 total podcast appearances in his life, is what he said on Pardon My Take. And, well, body armor seemed to be a big reason. We gotta secure that body armor partnership and sponsorship is my takeaway.
Well, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm opening a Mamba edition or Mamba Forever edition body armor, strawberry grape. So no, it's not Ravens colors, Bengals fans. This is a 8 and 24 Kobe Bryant edition. Cheers, Joe. Come on, and I will personally drink 10 body armors while you're on the show, even if it's a normal 30-minute podcast. So there you go.
That's a big commitment. How is strawberry grape? You just tasted it for those not
Very
watching
good
on YouTube.
Very good. By the way, Joe, I didn't just get one to put on a show here. I mean, I drink body armor. Here's the strawberry banana one too. So who knows, Locked On Bengals listeners, maybe try to move mountains and try to get Joe Burrow to come on this show. We would appreciate that.
There's some free product placement for the body armor marketing executive listening to Locked On Bengals right now. Just imagine how we'll do when you're paying us to talk about your product. But Joe Burrow was on the PMT podcast and spent a lot of time with those guys. They do a great job of getting him to open up. His walls are definitely not so high with that group. Even his interaction with the Steelers fan who comes out in a TJ Watt shirt and is asking provocative pro Steelers questions to try to get under Joe Burrow's skin. Those were even pretty fun interactions. But I think the bits that stand out are more to do with what Joe had to say about football. And there wasn't a ton of, nitty gritty football conversation. That's not what Joe Burrow is there to do. But he did say that he's 120% of last year's strength and size, said he's added 15 pounds. And we noticed that he looked stronger and bigger in the offseason program. And now he's giving a number about 15 to 20% stronger, he says.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and I haven't seen Joe super recent. Obviously, it was nearly a month ago now, the last time I saw Joe in person. But when he was in Paris and when he's in France and he's trying on some of these different things, and like the chess picture that he posted on Instagram, which one of the things I thought was cool during this podcast, he reveals that was just some person that he was playing. It wasn't anyone that he knew. He blundered his queen and ended up losing in the chess master behind him.
I like that he said there's like some French IM standing beside him just trash talking him the whole time. And he's like, I don't understand your English. You can't trash talk me back. Yeah, that was a good bit.
And he ended up losing, right? So I think the thing that stood out to me, though, the chess stood out to you in that picture. The thing that stood out to me, I was like, man, Joe looks like, and I saw him in person, but just seeing him and comparing the Joe that's there today versus even a year ago. And I thought he was in great shape a year ago, but he's clearly bigger. And so what does it mean? I don't know. I don't think he knows exactly, but The fact that we have a number on it, roughly 15 pounds, thanks to PMT for pushing it, because I'm not sure he would have said it in a press conference setting. You're right. He was a little more comfortable, you could tell. And so now we have a number. And I think in season, just to give people an idea, I think there's been seasons, including when he stayed healthy, where he's been like 205, like in season. And because in season it gets tough. You're not strength training as much, and he'll drop weight a little bit from where he is now. I would say in season, at least a little. Won't be as muscular as cut. But will it be better if he's 215 instead of 205? And I'm estimating there. Maybe he's 208. But I do think he was in the 200, sub 210 range throughout various points of his career. So I do think that is noteworthy. And obviously, we know he loves to work out and train and all of those things. But the diet's backed it up. And I think it's because of that casein protein that he's been taking at night has been part of it.
If you watch the Part of My Take podcast, you know why James is specifically bringing up casein. I thought it was interesting that, sorry, before I move on to a new topic, it'll be interesting to see how the increased bulk impacts him on the field. And we won't see that for a while. And you're right. Typically, these guys lose a little bit of weight, at least a quarterback throughout the season. It's just hard to keep it on, is what we've been told time and time again and what you can observe over the course of a season. But it'll be interesting to see early in the season how, if at all, he looks different from an athletic perspective, because he said he's been working on these things. We've seen him working on throwing off platform throughout the offseason program. So seeing how that makes a difference on the field is something that will be interesting to see in the future. What I was going to say is Part of My Take kind of got themselves a little bit. They were asking Joe, like, how many push-ups you doing? And Joe said he hasn't done push-ups since the wrist injury, which I found interesting as well, because we know he's been back and he's been working out and he's been doing all these things. And he even said himself that, part of this injury was that he was able to keep up on his workouts and essentially had like a 10-week start on his off-season fitness program, which obviously had to be adjusted for the wrist. But the specific, I haven't done push-ups because of my wrist, and then they changed the question to squats instead, was an interesting moment as well.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure Joe does many. By the way, finish that first body armor, Joe. This is 20 ounces, 200 ounces during the show if you come on. I think, and I'm going to ask him now, but I don't think he does many push-ups anyways. I don't think most NFL players do a ton of push-ups. I'm not saying they do zero, and I'm not saying the number is normally zero. But how many, are we sure that all these quarterbacks are doing push-ups? Like, I think there's just so many other exercises, workouts. Like, he does squat, and I know he benches, but it isn't necessarily benching in the traditional sense of getting on a bench and putting on 300 pounds. No, I think he uses dumbbells to bench, and I think he squats, but he might be doing split squats, not the traditional squats, because he wants to target this leg and then target the other leg and go slower. Like, there's so many things that go into it that I do wonder how many push-ups he ever was worried about doing or did do as part of his workout. And it might be little to none, but I'm glad you mentioned that, because I do think that probably did stand out to some people. I would almost bet he mentioned the wrist as an excuse instead of saying, oh man, I never do push-ups. Because it almost sounds weird if he's like, I never do push-ups. But I think there's a decent chance that he just doesn't do many push-ups, period.
I don't think the NFL strength training programs are heavy on calisthenics, let's say. They have
pull-ups. I think pull-ups are important, right?
Sure, maybe they do. I'm sure they do some of that. But my general point is, you're not doing body weight squats. You're not doing a ton of bar stuff. They're not doing muscle ups. They have state-of-the-art weight facilities and equipment available to them. So they're not confined to. Not to say that calisthenics can't be a great workout. One of my most in shape friends is a calisthenics only fitness guy, but I don't think that's like the NFL approach is all.
Yeah, that stuff can work for us.
for anyone.
But
It's just not the
yeah,
NFL way, I don't think.
yeah, we are anyone. That's what I mean. Like the average Joe can do that for sure, but Joe is not the average Joe, as one of his ads says, which I can't believe that I just did that, but I did. Let's stick with Joe Burrow, and up next, discuss his motivation and if he's actually flying under the radar going into this season. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Yes, Gametime, the app you need to download right now. Because if you're planning on going to a Reds game this summer, well, you need the app handy because ticket prices, well, they drop the closer you get to first pitch. And it isn't just Major League Baseball, it's NFL. It's any live event you can think of. Maybe you're hoping to go to the Luke Combs concert that's coming to town next month, or Thomas Rhett that's coming to town next month. You can get all of those tickets with the Gametime app. You get views from your seat. You also get a lowest price guarantee, and their all-in prices show you exactly what you're going to pay for those seats. So don't delay. Download Gametime and take advantage of all they have to offer right now. And when you download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
James, there are a number of other interesting takeaways from Joe Burrow's appearance on the Part of My Take podcast, including the quote that went viral, the I'm going to give them something to talk about, they've forgotten about me a little bit. But when he says that, he's not saying it from a position that I think is cocky or too indignant. He's very in tune with, when you get hurt and you're not out there, people forget about you because you're not showing them what you can do. If I was out there, I don't think this happens, essentially is what he says. But out of that, you get this, I'm going to give them something to talk about this year. And you also get the doubling down on the window's always open when I'm here kind of thing, the, wanting to play for another 15 years soundbite from Joe Burrow. And these are some of the things he says that you can look at and say, well, maybe we're looking back in 15 years on his career, and you can see that he's had this plan all along.
Yeah, I think the under the radar, being slept on, all of that, I think he feels it for sure. You're right. He understands it. He has a good grasp of why. I also think that he admittedly was like, I love the spot I'm in, where he, even though he may be, and this is a topic for another, like the second biggest star in the NFL. And the first one has a lot to do with who he's dating. But, and I'm talking about Travis, obviously, not Joe, but like his star power is pretty freaking strong. Like it's ahead of Mahomes. And so for him to have that and know that, and at the same time realize, like, football wise, he is being slept on a little bit. I think that's fair to say. I think there's real doubt about him now, whether it's realistic or not. And the last time we saw that, what did they do? They started 5-3. We didn't know what they would be. And he came off of that knee injury, and he played pretty well. And then obviously was awesome down the stretch of that year. And it was a flawed football team. And they look up and they're a player or two away from a Lombardi. I think he has a good sense of how to respond to these types of situations. And he's comfortable flying under the radar from a football standpoint a little bit, as much as Joe Burrow, who I just said might be the second biggest star in the NFL, as much as he can fly under the radar. Because this idea that like a CJ Stroud is ahead of Joe, or insert whatever quarterback that isn't named Mahomes, or, some put Allen, fine. If you want to put him 3, it's probably about as low as I would accept without making a face. And I think there are plenty of people that have him lower than 3rd right now in their their off-season quarterback rankings.
Well, and some of our listeners are making a face when you even bring up 3, as evidenced by their reaction to Arif Hassan in our most recent episode, saying that some people out there put Josh Allen ahead of Joe Burrow. I know you're not.
Yeah, some people do. They do. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah, I mean that's just a statement of fact that some people out there do. You can't judge it by jersey sales. I would say it's interesting that the best-selling jersey, according to this article from June 2024, is Jalen Hurts, followed by Jason Kelce, followed by Patrick Mahomes, followed by Travis Kelce. So you can't do jersey sales for it, but I would agree with you generally that Joe Burrow has an immense amount of star power and influence. I'm sure there are some objective measurements like social media followings and things like that you could do. But in terms of flying under the radar for a player with the star power that Joe Burrow carries, Heisman winner, Super Bowl runner-up, AFC championship games in back-to-back years, won the national title in college football, obviously, doesn't get a lot of discussion from a football perspective. Like, people talk about these quarterbacks in the AFC, and Burrow does get mentioned and brought up, but you're right. CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert with a new coach. I mean, even in the NFC, Jordan Love, who has a half season of playing like a good quarterback in the NFL, is getting a lot of preseason love. And
Mike Tannenbaum, he said he would take him over every quarterback not named Patrick Mahomes. And I like Jordan Love. But,
Jordan, wow. I didn't hear that.
See? That's what this season, baby. I mean,
I try not to
social media, man.
Yeah. Some other takeaways. You ready to talk about the other takeaways, the other points to wrap up the pardon my take? You have anything else on the motivation or plans to play 15 years or anything like that?
No, I mean, I think the 15-year thing is, we'll see how if bigger is better. And then we'll see, I certainly hope so. But outside of that, no. The fact that you've done more push-ups than him this offseason is pretty noteworthy.
I mean, so have probably all of our listeners, like incidentally falling asleep, on the couch, pushing up to get up or something.
That doesn't count.
I thought it was funny when they asked him about the United States losing to Japan in that under 20 or under 21 football tournament where, I think it's not like high end, star players from the US going there, but losing at an American football tournament as the American team, kind of embarrassing. And I think they've lost the last few times this tournament has happened, but it just didn't catch a public eye. And then they lost to Japan, and they asked Joe Burrow about that. And it kind of led into this Olympic thing and the flag football conversation coming to the Olympics. And Joe Burrow's like, yeah, I want to go play with Justin and Jamar. Because how many groups of friends can, and the PMT guys can, how many groups of friends can go win as a team Olympic sport? Just like, yeah, me and my friends are going to go win the Olympics at flag football real quick. Because that's something that they could do.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it would be really cool. I can't believe that USA lost either. Like, that's insane. Like, I think Joe Burrow, me, and insert someone else will run out there and we'll be all right. So, yeah, that
I think the team is mostly made up of like D2, D3. But even then, you would think like they should be beating Japan at American football. There's not a big American football culture in Japan.
Speed kills, man.
Joe Burrow also thinks.
I'm sure like those flag teams just in general are so fast.
Well, this wasn't even flag. This was tackle football.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
No,
right? It just led to a conversation about flag football because people have been confused. People thought it was flag football, but this is
you're right. They were talking. Yes, because the Olympics, it's flag. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's rough.
It's crazy. Joe Burrow also thinks taunting is a dumb rule in the NFL. He likes taunting. He thinks that taunting should be allowed. I thought that was funny.
I love the story.
Yeah, good story.
Because the story is that's exactly why Joe is going to command respect from any player that walks through Paycor, whether they play for the Chiefs. Like if Chris Jones signs with the Bengals in 3 years, he's going to be like, that's my dude, because he's he was like that on the biggest stage with the Super Bowl on the line. And he knew that I remember that Instagram post and to give him that respect. Yeah, I think that was pretty cool.
It goes back to, the Philly stuff in his first year. He earns the respect of his opponents and obviously his teammates. We'll have plenty of time to talk about Joe Burrow. Training camp around the corner. He's a big thing, big storyline that we'll be watching for training camp. We're going to finish up the show, though, James, with revisiting this year's Ring of Honor. That announcement could be coming in the near future, perhaps. Who do we think will emerge victorious in this year's Ring of Honor voting? We'll cover that topic to finish the show coming up next.
The Ring of Honor vote ended last month, Jake, expecting an announcement, in the near future, we'll say that. And 2 more inductees of the 11 will get in this year. The 11 nominees, for those that may be forgetting: Jim Breach, James Brooks, Chris Collinsworth, Corey Dillon, David Fulcher, Tim Krumrie, Dave Lapham, Max Montoya, Lamar Parrish, Bob Trumpy, and Reggie Williams. When you hear those names, and the voting's done, we don't know who won, but we're going to make our predictions. Who comes to mind in who in your mind is going to win out of those 11?
Well, it seems like the public movement for Corey Dillon is likely, I'm assuming, been successful. Is that a fair assumption?
I think he is, based on how I know votes went. That's part of it. And you're right,
Yeah.
the social media. I think he is far and away the number one vote getter.
You think? Okay.
I do. I think he's like lapping guys. And by the way, it shouldn't be that way. There's just this backlog. We've talked about it. So it's going to happen where these front runners emerge and people want to make sure that their guy gets in. And that's what we're seeing right now, I think, with Corey Dillon.
I think there's been a fair amount of public consensus from what I've seen in various social media discussions about the Bengals Ring of Honor this year that it's Corey Dillon and Lamar Parrish. No?
I think that's the favorite. That would be my prediction.
Yeah.
That wouldn't necessarily be who I would pick. We've talked about this. I think the age factor is such a huge thing because Lamar should have been in when Corey Dillon was still running at Paycor Stadium, when he was still carrying the ball.
Yeah.
And so when you have guys like Reggie Williams, who I met last year, who again should have probably been in roughly when Corey Dillon was still carrying but maybe breaking records against the Broncos, or a James Brooks, or obviously Dave Lapham goes in there. Tim Krumrie. Well, I was waiting on Bob Trumpy for those that are everydayers that know that I went on my Bob Trumpy rant. Obviously, he's the greatest tight end in team history. Much like the movement for Corey has been, he's the greatest running back in team history. That's actually much more of a debate with James Brooks. There is no one close to Trumpy in what he did from a tight end perspective and like best at his position in team history. So that's what's tough is I think that those guys are going to be on the outside looking in for another year.
Well, and his career started the earliest out of all the guys on this list.
And he's 80,
so, you want to go by how long they've been waiting, make sure they can enjoy it when they are inducted and all these things. Then I do think that there is some real chronology that should be considered with these votes. But Corey Dillon successfully mended any broken bridges with his departure from the team, with his own open discussion. I wouldn't call it like a media tour or pandering or anything like that. I really think it was a genuine like realization and an olive branch from Corey Dillon to between Corey Dillon and the fan base, I think. And he had an opportunity to get his message out to the Bengals fans that he needed to get that out to. And as a result, I think he'll probably be rewarded here this year. At least that's the way it feels based on everything that we see. Now, is it possible that there are thousands of Bengals fans who are voting for the Ring of Honor who are not seeing that stuff? It's possible. But
Oh, well,
I'd imagine that a lot of the Bengals fans that are really engaging with this process are hearing the stuff that people like Bengals Jim are talking about when they're talking about what they think should happen for the Ring of Honor, for example.
yeah. And I debated Bengal Jim because I'm like, you're supposed to be this historian and you don't have Trumpy. You don't have Trumpy, Jim. We talked about that and I gave him a little because obviously he can vote. Give him a little help for that. But it really is. It just shows the downside of waiting so long and having the backlog. That's all. No one's debating anything about Corey. Like Corey's awesome.
Yeah.
And should be in, no doubt. There's no debate there. It just wouldn't it have been great if Ken Riley was in 25 years ago and remembered it, and his family got to see his name up there, when he was still alive. So I think that's my concern. I mean, Bob Trumpy is 9 years younger than Mike Brown. Just to put it in perspective that way. Mike Brown's 88, Trumpy's 79. He just turned 79. So I rounded up to 80. But I want those guys in, and it's just going to take a little time. Next year will be really interesting who emerges as the favorite, because I don't see a scenario where Corey isn't in. And so a lot of these guys now are multiple generations ago.
Mm-hmm.
All of them are.
Yeah.
And so who emerges? I think that's going to be interesting because we've kind of gotten out of the 2000s where Willie got in, obviously Chad last year, all of those guys.
And how much of it's going to be recognition? Like, people know who Dave Lapham is because he still calls the games, is very involved with the organization. That's a big part of the reason that he should be in the Ring of Honor. People know who Chris Collinsworth is because of his involvement with primetime football and with Pro Football Focus and all these things. And he's an announcer and very prominent for his own post-football career, in addition to their football accomplishments.
I think I'm glad you brought up Lapham. I think if there's one, again, I wouldn't say dark horse, but for this, we both agreed on the two that we think it's going to be in Parrish and Dillon. If there's one that could throw a wrench into that, like, are we sure Lapham didn't edge out Parrish? Like, he might have. Very well could have. And so I am curious to see the results whenever they're announced.
Every time we talk about this, I just think there's 11 guys left on the list of nominees, right? And we're not yet to the point where AJ Green's going to be nominated, where Geno Atkins is going to be nominated, where players of that generation are going to be nominated. Whitworth, of course, and more. There will be more guys from that era, I think.
Brandon Tate.
Why? Tate.
All right. Wow. All right. That's disrespectful to Brandon. Don't do that.
We're not to that point yet. But
Andrew Hawkins,
if they had opened the Ring of Honor 10 years ago, 10
Josh
years prior
Johnson.
to when they did, literally only talking about 10 years more in the past, right? If they had started this 10 years earlier, all these guys would be in. And then we will be talking about who's the next guy that's going to be worthy of going into the Ring of Honor. You wouldn't be working through this backlog. And instead of there being debates over these people who you know are your franchise greats who deserve to be in, you would be looking at the pool of players that exists and trying to identify, okay, who's the next guy who 5 years removed from the end of his NFL career is like, you know what, we need to put that guy in the Ring of Honor. You'll be having those conversations instead of debating this list of guys that you know are more than likely all going to end up in the Ring of Honor at some point.
Bob Bratkowski.
Okay.
Which ones were a joke and which ones were serious? Check out my face on YouTube. A reminder to subscribe.
That should wrap up this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast, I would say. Until next time, we're going to do a mailbag to wrap up our little summer break before we dive into training camp previews next week, barring other news, of course, that we may have to cover. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.